Welcome to Polaris Live. Thank you for joining us for today's discussion in our series focused on the U.S.-China relationship and its global implications as seen through the eyes of experts from around the world. Polaris Live is a non-commercial, user-supported channel. Your support is vital to our work and is the reason we can continue to produce our cutting-edge discussion of the most consequential relationship of our time. Please go to my website, kashmeri.com, and subscribe and show your support. Today's edition of Polaris Live is very special. The landmark summit between the presidents of China and the United States has just taken place, and we are proud to bring to our global audience one of the first analyses of the summit meeting from both, and I repeat, both China and US perspective in this 1-hour special of Polaris Live. This important endeavor is made possible through our partnership with the famous Beijing Club of International Dialogue, whose co-founder and Secretary General, Ms. Han Hua, joins me today as the co-anchor of this program that is beamed to you from Beijing and New York, and brings together the authoritative voices of experts from China and the United States. A reminder to our audience, this program comes to you live, and if you have questions for today's guest, please feel free to submit them using the bar on the right-hand side of the screen. After the live event, you can also listen to these programs on your favorite podcast platform. A Mandarin version of the program will be posted on the Beijing Club's website. If you are a subscriber, you will also receive a specially curated one-page executive summary of the program directly in your mailbox. And I will now turn over the chair to Ms. Han Hua, who will introduce our guests, after which I will ask the opening question, and we'll then alternate in asking questions. As we reach closing time, Ms. Han will ask each guest for their closing remarks. Let me close the proceedings. So, without further ado, thank you for being part of this conversation, and over to you, Ms. Hua. All yours, Ms. Hua.
Sorry, I don't know whether you can hear me or not, but
Yes,
I
we can.
cannot hear Sarwar at all. So just according to what we discussed beforehand, I cannot hear you, but I'm just like doing some monologue, but I hope I can do that perfectly.
Okay.
I think it's my turn to introduce you, the distinguished guests, friends, and viewers around the world. Welcome to this special live dialogue hosted by Polaris-Live in partnership with Beijing Club for International Dialogue. Up until now, I can still hear you, but I'm just going on.
Sure.
President Trump's visit just concluded to China has once again placed China and U.S. relations at the center of global attention. So beyond trade figures and diplomatic symbolism, the world is asking deeper questions. Can the world's two largest economies stabilize their strategic competition? Are we witnessing the beginning of a new framework for coexistence, what the Chinese side calls constructive strategic stability, or as President Trump remarked in his Fox News interview, is the most important thing simply the relationship itself? Tonight, we'll explore not only what we agreed upon, but also what remains uncertain, consequential, and potentially transformative for the future international order. It is my great honor to introduce two of our distinguished guests today. Senior Colonel Zhou is now senior fellow at the Center for International Security and Strategy at Tsinghua University, and a retired senior colonel in the Chinese People's Liberation Army. He has published more than 180 English essays and opinions in leading publications, including Foreign Affairs, Financial Times, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and broadcast media including BBC, NBC, Fox News, DW, and he is a regular speaker at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore and at Munich Security Conference. His new book is Should the World Fear China by Hearst Publishing House. And he also wrote about the space security in a book published by Oxford University Press. As far as I know, he's working on his new book, so let's look forward to that. Another distinguished speaker, Mark Chandler, he is the managing director and chief marketing strategist for Bannockburn Global Forex. He has covered global capital markets for more than 30 years. He is an experienced writer and speaker. Chandler appears regularly in the financial media, including Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, Barron's, Bloomberg, and the Washington Post, among others. Mark also provides his insights and the commentary on CNBC, Bloomberg, CNN, Fox Businesses. His publications include, but not limited to, Making Sense of the Dollar and the Political Economy of Tomorrow. Chandler is also an honorary fellow of the Foreign Policy Association, associate professor at New York University Center for Global Affairs, and he's visiting professor at the Darden School of Business at the University of Virginia. So, hands to you, Sarwar, as I'm still cannot hear anything.
Can you hear me at all? You cannot hear me. Can you hear me, Mark?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay.
Good morning.
Zhou seems to have gone off the screen. I'll apologize to our global audience. This is a transcontinental China, U.S., Canada operation, so you'll forgive us if we are running into some technical issues. I would like to ask both our guests this question. Tell our audience, what was the big overarching strategic message to come out of the Xi-Trump summit? And what impression do you think each president took away about the other? Short answers would be appreciated. And let's start with Mark Chandler, and then we will go to Zhou Blow.
Good, thank you. I think that the most important strategic outcome of the meeting was a sense of stability. That is, that it seems that both sides have it in their interest not to go back to where we were a year ago with over 100% tariffs on each other. I think the idea, and we can talk about the details, but I think the overall idea, I think the big impression I think that the world will be left with is that it's not a question now so much of the U.S. being the hegemonic power and China the rising power, but I think both sides have used this expression that captures what's going on, and I think it's G2. You know, we have a G7 finance minister and central bankers meeting coming up in the next few days. That had always been, or has been for the last 20 or 30 years, a key forum. But now it seems much more important, the G2 relationship. And I think that's the takeaway, is the strategic importance of that relationship, and to have like guardrails on it, some kind of framework to manage the competition so it doesn't lead to disastrous results, not just for both countries, but for the world.
And Mark, let me just follow through with one more point that I'd want you to make, which is what impression do you think each leader took away about the other?
I think that we're at a dangerous situation in the sense that both countries seem to think the other is in decline. I think that the sense, and I think that, you know, it's ironic, it seems to me, that President Xi even brought up the Thucydides, dilemma, which is the idea that a rising power and a top dog country, that there's this rivalry that takes place, and that it could lead to, like in Thucydides' case, leads to war. And so I think that the impression that neither one probably gave up their priors. And the priors are that the U.S. economy, that not only the U.S. economy, but the U.S. expansion projection of its power, and in particular, the threat that the U.S. made on two NATO countries, I think is a very important part of how President Xi views the United States right now. And at the same time, going back 20 years even, we've had some key U.S. economists like Nobel Prize winning Paul Krugman, who has argued that the Chinese model can't be sustained. And yet here we are, 2026, and the Chinese economy is still growing, something on the magnitude of, call it 5%, more than twice the rate of the United States. It's still growing despite a shrinking population. And so I think that both sides ought to really re-examine their priors about the other one being in decline. But as we sit here today, I don't think that the summit changed the minds about the trajectory of both countries.
Bojo, over to you.
Thank you, Sarwar. Can you hear me now?
Hear you perfectly.
Okay, good. Well, I think this conference, this summit meeting is most important in that after 9 years, after 9 years since Trump's first term, so many things have changed. And one of the fundamental changes is that Chinese people believe they are now more equal to the United States. So this visit would serve as a kind of, indication of this kind of a balanced strength, because Chinese leader President Xi Jinping and Donald Trump have agreed, at least sort of, on the so-called constructive strategic stability. So when you talk about something constructive, basically that could be anything, right? It's a kind of a good wish, yeah. But when it comes to strategic stability, then how can it be stability unless it is between two of almost equal strengths?
Right.
And this term, strategic stability, during the Cold War referred to exclusively about equal number of nuclear arsenals, more or less, on both sides. But between China and the United States, I don't believe we are going to reach nuclear parity, although it is reported that our nuclear arsenal is also increasing, rapidly. Well, since I'm a Chinese, I'm not supposed to talk about the number of nuclear warheads, which I actually don't know. But according to CIPRI, according to Pentagon, by the end of last year, we have 600, and we will reach about 1,500 by 2035. So this kind of balance is something new for Chinese. And I believe China has earned it, because in the last 9 years, our dependency upon American economy has dropped. And in the tariff war, which was launched by Donald Trump, we are certainly not the one who blinked first. And then in the war in Iran, well, apparently President Trump seems to be in an awkward position, and he should have asked his Chinese counterpart, President Xi, for help in one way or another.
And before I turn over to Ms. Hanhua, Joe, what impression do you think each leader took away of the other?
Well, I think they have, of course, China always have a lot of respect for the United States, because this is the strongest nation on earth, right? But what is interesting is in the remarks of Donald Trump, because not only this time, but even before, he has talked at length how he admired Chinese leader, yeah, how he, you know, like this great country, so on and so forth. So there is a kind of genuine appreciation coming from President Trump. And what is the reason behind that? Some people believe that, okay, he just would have respect for strong men, right? That might be the case, but it is also true that China is still developing, as Mark has mentioned. Before COVID, so many international think tanks believe that China will catch up with the United States economically by 2030. And one British think tank even has concluded that that might be achieved by 2027. But after COVID, people say, well, that may not be true. And some people would say China may never reach, economic parity with the United States because of, aging population, because of a sluggish economy. But as Mark has just pointed out, it seems that the Chinese economy is staging you come back, right? Yeah, so people then would look at the Chinese economy in different light, and therefore China's future in different light.
Over to you, Ms. Han.
Okay. Thank you, Sarwar. Again, I think I really like my sound is back, so I really enjoy this co-moderating style, because that means that we do not only have a balanced answer, but we can have a balanced and questions as well. So my question towards two guests are: in your view, is this summit mainly driven by America's art of the deal style of transactional diplomacy, or by the Chinese style that is approach to stabilizing relations? Mark, over to you first.
Yeah, I want to say that it might be too early to tell. And the reason I say that is that my understanding of the sequence of events is that as the two presidents were meeting for the first time since 2017, during that meeting, that bilateral meeting, before it was over, statements from President Xi were hitting the news wires, and the warning, very clear warning about the delicateness of the issue about Taiwan. And as you know, in December of last year, the U.S. sold about $11 billion of weapons to Taiwan. China, of course, in Beijing did not appreciate that. And yet in the recent 3 months or so, 4 months, the administration is putting together another package, arms sales to Taiwan, a record package, $14 billion. And after the summit, President Trump indicated that he's not sure he's going to proceed with it. This is really an important, I want to say this becomes, I think, a litmus test for what really happened at that bilateral meeting, where both countries' readouts were very different. The U.S. readout didn't even mention Taiwan. President Trump said that tariffs weren't discussed. Chinese readout was quite different. And so I think something like this. I think that if the U.S. proceeds with the sales, this arms deal to Taiwan, Beijing will act accordingly. It will realize that the summit was more about photo opportunity and less about the U.S. willingness to recognize and honor what China has clearly stated, as it has in the past, how Taiwan is a red line. It's like the one thing that seems like it's not up for negotiations. It's not something that can be compromised over. If the U.S. goes ahead with that sale, I think they will see Chinese cooperation on a number of fronts weaken. On the other hand, if the President Trump does not go through with the arms deal, I think he'll be criticized here at home, where his domestic support is waning. It's been weak for a while now, but it will not be helped by that. Up until now, the U.S. position has been, for at least 40 years, that it will not ask Beijing's permission or acceptance of its weapons sales to Taiwan. So if the U.S. reneges on it now, if the U.S. backtracks now, it'll be a major victory, I think, in this competitive tension with China. I think it's got far-reaching ramifications as well. As I mentioned, the U.S. has threatened to attack 2 NATO members in the past several months, Canada and Greenland. And reneging on an arms deal with Taiwan because it would annoy Beijing would send a message to U.S. allies. We already know that the U.S. weapons used in Iran has depleted and has really forced the U.S. to cannibalize, that is, to borrow weapon systems that it had previously placed elsewhere, like in South Korea. So I think that this is a very important issue, and the outcome, in some ways, of the summit won't be known until we get a U.S. decision about its arms sales to Taiwan.
Thanks, Mark. This is a very unique perspective. And since you mentioned Taiwan, so before Bo answers, I would like to combine my next question regarding to Taiwan to Bo as well, because we all know that Taiwan remains one of the most sensitive, one of the most dangerous issues in China-U.S. relations. And during this visit, both sides once again emphasized the importance of maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. But as Mark pointed out, the two readouts are kind of different. So the Chinese side urged the United States to handle the Taiwan issue with the utmost prudence. So, Bo, in your view, what bottom line understandings currently exist between China and the United States on the Taiwan issue, and what kind of outcome, driven out of this visit? And over the next few years, where do you see the greatest risks to stability, to this so-called strategic stability in the Taiwan Strait coming from?
Thank you, Helen. This is a good question, which includes so many other important questions. But actually, Trump's attitude is not a surprise to me. Yeah, no matter how the Chinese government would wish, he could actually step further to say, we oppose Taiwan's independence. That would be a small step forward from the previous expressions that we do not support Taiwan's independence. But he didn't say that. But he said something on Air Force One that he hoped no independence from Taiwan, so on and so forth. I believe he deliberately want to avoid that. He wants to avoid he wants to avoid people's impressions that he is kowtowing to the Chinese leadership. He certainly knows how important this issue is, because President Xi has mentioned it. Stressfully. So he just tried to avoid that. But the point is, I don't believe right now American president's attitude would matter that much. Why? Because his remarks could be corrected by the next president, right? So and then even if he said something that could be walked back by the Congress. So this is how we found the Taiwan Relation Act and the 6 assurances, right? And even I can imagine a scenario in which he wants to trade, with an empty promise for something tangible. For example, if he says something, okay, I would like to oppose Taiwan's independence, but what would you give me in return? Right? This kind of lip service, could have a price, right? So I personally don't believe it would matter that much. But I would say there is a kind of fundamental change in America's strategic ambiguity. Because in the past, American strategic ambiguity is built upon its much stronger strengths against China. But now this kind of strength, against China is shrinking, especially if it is in the Taiwan Strait, because we have, all the advantages of fighting our home turf, so to speak, right? And very few people have realized actually China also has a kind of strategic ambiguity. That is, we never say, okay, when we might launch attack on Taiwan. We don't say that because we are still hopeful of peaceful reunification. And nobody can say for sure that eventually this kind of reunification will be achieved by force. So if China does not say that, yeah, if China does not give a timeline, then the United States can only be ambiguous, yeah, and then American allies can only be ambiguous. So this is a chain of reaction, starting with China's strategic ambiguity.
Okay, so for Mark, deals are deals. However, and for Bo, it is like both sides have different strategic ambiguity. Will this be replaced by strategic stability? Let's discuss that a little bit later. So over to you, Sarwar.
Oh, thank you. That's a beautiful connection to what I wanted to ask. And both Mark and Joe and Bo came up with this. I thought you were referring, Bo, to this press conference that the president had on the way back. I listened to that, and there were two items that came up, and they relate directly to what you and Mark have said. A reporter asked Mr. Trump about Taiwan. And what is his position now? Did he discuss the arms deal? And when he said yes, the reporter said, well, how could you do that? Because we have an agreement going, that you can't talk about arms to China. And Mr. Trump said this: one, how long has it been since that agreement was signed? 1982, the reporter said. And Trump said, well, he said, that's years ago. And then, to my surprise, and I want to know if you're and Mark and even you are surprised, is Mr. Trump said, does America really want another war 9,000 miles from its shores? This is Mr. Trump speaking. What do you make of that? And let's go, Joe and Mark. And please, wife, you let me ask your opinion too after that.
Well, let me give you my answer in a very straightforward way. I believe there is a great chance for the United States to turn from strategic ambiguity to strategic clarity. That is, not to support Taiwan independence. Because Trump really said something that quite a few American scholars have mentioned to me. China is getting stronger, and why would the United States fight against China on an issue that even the United States believe Taiwan is part of China, right? And we are still having patience. People always talking about the stick, yeah, from the Chinese mainland. But people forgot the Chinese mainland actually has exercised maximum patience and has actually offered a lot of carrots. Yeah, for example, even the young people's opinion in Taiwan is becoming different because they see what is happening in mainland China, yeah, through TikTok and so on and so forth. They understand this is already a superpower, right? And Taiwan cannot move away. So rather than opposing the Chinese mainland, why can't you become a proud member of the strongest nation on earth? So it's not only young people, but some intellectuals and some people in the Communist Party. They're changing the mentality, I would say. So it's not that the Taiwanese leader Lai Ching-te could actually put everything under his control. No, he can't.
Thank you, Mark. A short one from you.
Yeah, I think that in the big picture of things, I think that what is the U.S. wanting? I mean, the U.S. wants Taiwan to move its semiconductor capability offshore, have more plants in the United States. Europe wants to have more high-end semiconductors being produced there in Europe. So it seems to me that between the demographics with both China, but especially Taiwan, shrinking populations, losing perhaps its competitive advantage in semiconductor chips as pressure grows to really disperse them. I think Taiwan in the coming years loses some of its strategic importance. But
Okay.
at the same time, though, we want to be. I mean, I think the U.S. I think it's something like this. I think people often misunderstand the U.S. administration. We even seen some when the King Charles visited the U.S. recently. He warned the U.S. against isolationism, and I want to say that that's a misreading of the U.S. foreign policy. It's not isolationist. Think about it. In the past year or so, the U.S. has bombed 7 countries. We've kidnapped a leader of Venezuela. We're at war with Iran. This is not an isolationist foreign policy. This is a unilateral foreign policy. And the U.S. unilateralism, I think, is not about, like I say, not withdrawing the edges of the empire, but it's recognizing where we want to fight. And somehow, I think what the U.S. has done is it's choosing to fight in Iran over using those weapons to at least be sort of on the shelf to defend Taiwan, for example. So I do think that there is a change in the relationship between the U.S. and Taiwan, and that going forward, even after 2028, when the U.S. elects a new president, I think that that trust has been broken, and countries have to not rely as much on the United States as they had been for defense for the last 50 years or so.
And over to you. I'm to keep up with you, and please continue on with your questions because I think you're on to something here.
Thank you. I'm just listening very carefully of both Mark and Bo's discussion about the Taiwan issue, and for me, the two of our guests are talking about Trump administration's perception and handling of the Taiwan issue. Among other critical issues, the perception and the handling of this are differing in very significant way from the previous U.S. administrations and would be different from the next U.S. administrations. So it's interesting to continue the discussion. So beyond the Taiwan issue, what kind of structural contradictions between China and the United States do you believe this visit was unable to address and are unlikely to be resolved in the short term? Among issues, there are such as technological competition, supply chain security, which Mark just mentioned about the chips, ideological perceptions, and the competition over global rule setting. Which do you think will remain long-term sources of tension and which might see signs of easing first? Bo, to you first, and then Mark.
Well, thank you, Helen, for all these questions. Well, simply put, I believe 21st century actually is rosier for us than 20th century because China and the US are competitors, but we're competing within the same international system. Well, if you compare China with the United States, probably nobody would disagree to say that the United States probably looks more like a revisionist power than China, right? So China has said time again that we're guardian of the international system. So this is a positive side. And on the bilateral relation itself, I do believe this is a competitive relationship. But the question is, to what extent do we have to compete while we have to cooperate elsewhere? You see, there is a difference between Trump first and Trump second. During his first term, in which China was all of a sudden described as a strategic competitor, there are not many fields of cooperation mentioned. Very few of them. But now, even from Biden administration onto the second Trump administration, you hear all kinds of requests coming from the United States, on China for cooperation, and I think that is totally understandable. I think the fundamental reason behind it is that before Trump first, all American presidents actually have hoped that China might one day become like one of us. But to see China growing still stronger, but still different, then eventually, during his first term, it is just like the eruption of a dormant volcano. So United States could not bear with it anymore. But eventually, I believe Americans would also be pragmatic. Yeah, China certainly is not exporting revolution anywhere. China is not, exporting ideology anywhere. Well, just give example. Yeah, President Putin is coming to visit China soon. I've been wondering about this. Why can't China and the United States also have this kind of institutionalized exchange of visits? Yeah, between these two countries. China and Russia have these visits not because we have the same ideology. Again, yeah, China and the United States have different values, but we do not have a conflicting ideology. So it is equally, possible for China and the U.S. To have more exchange of visits, because this kind of exchange of visits, no matter what they can produce, it is a big relief to all other people, in the rest of the world, watching how these two titans might, coexist. It's a good relief for all of them. Look at the results of this visit. Well, people in the United States might be disappointed to say, okay, China didn't have the 3B, the so-called the beef, Bing, and Boeing. Yeah, China didn't say much about all this, but we have two other Bs, the Board of Investment, Board of Trade. I think these two organizations are far more important. Why? Because with these two new umbrellas, we won't have this kind of crazy tariff increase to 145%, right? Because these two organizations are supposed to regulate these kind of things, and these kind of mechanism would be tremendously helpful to make our competition healthy and manageable.
Mark?
Yeah, well, I guess I've seen things a little differently, I think. I think that the sense of desiring stability, it seems to me to be the strategy of the rising power. That is, imagine what's happened over the last 20 years. China's growth, greater confidence in its growth, greater confidence in its place in the world. And at the same time, this new world that we're entering seems to be centered around things like AI, things like electricity, which is going to fuel, moving away from coal. Electricity is the fuel that we need for the AI. It seems to me that China, people in the West, I think, had this idea that because of China's ideology that it could not innovate. And what a miscue that was. What a misunderstanding that was about China and its innovation and its commitment to electricity generation. So I think that a period of stability helps the rising power, and right now that is China. It's going to further develop its AI capabilities. It's going to further develop its electrical generation abilities. I think that last year China added more electric power capacity than the U.S. or Europe put together added. And I think this is going to give China, after a period of stability, a greater movement, greater mobility, higher, a more robust economy. And already, as someone who specializes in foreign exchange, we know that if you just convert the China's GDP into dollars, the U.S. economy is larger. But economists, currency people recognize that not to simply use market prices, but to use some sense of valuation. And I think that most economists agree that the Chinese currency is about 20% undervalued, which is maybe a little bit less than the OECD says that the yen and the euro are also undervalued against the US dollar. So if we would put these currencies at fair value, what we call purchasing power parity, it already looks like the Chinese economy is bigger than the US economy. And to me, a key here is the cutting edge, perhaps what Lenin would call the commanding heights. AI, robotics. I mean, you think about what's going to happen. I've already seen it. It's all over the internet. Chinese robotic competitions, whether they're races, the humanoid android robots. and combining that with AI seems to me to be light years ahead of other countries. And so that's why I see this period of stability, the construction or the constructive strategic stability as really being very much in China's interest. It's almost like the peaceful rise, the previous, an older mantra, an older slogan, a peaceful rise. As long as China is not disrupted by these disruptions that the U.S. can cause, whether it's through the tariffs, export restrictions, other things, China, I think, says, just leave us alone and we'll grow and we'll eat your lunch. And I think that the U.S. doesn't have a strong response except to rely on its historical innovativeness and its financial prowess. And to me, the challenge here is whether the U.S., as Bo mentioned, such a transactional approach to its foreign policy, that we in the U.S., who's run down our arsenal and need critical earth to rebuild it, the critical magnets that China has a virtual monopoly on, whether we're willing to trade that for our typical, I think as Bo mentioned, strategic ambiguity towards Taiwan.
Interesting. Leave us alone. So this is a perfect momentum for Sarwar. Over to you to build on.
Listen, if you will permit me, Hua, I want to tell you, when I checked into my hotel at Beijing, I saw 4 robots, Mark, that did room service.
Yeah.
And I was coming back from meeting somebody, and one of these robots intercepted me at the elevator. And I said, now I wonder who will go in first. And the robot waited until I went in first. And I told myself, China's doing amazing things. Not only do they build robots, but they teach them to respect their elders. But if you don't mind, let's just stay on the atmospherics a little more, because that's what's taking place in America right now. People are trying to cope with what just happened. And so this is more a cultural type of question, Zhou, that I will direct to you. President Trump calls Xi a special friend. He says, I have an ongoing relationship with President Xi. I don't see that repeated in Mr. Xi's remarks. And I'm just wondering whether there's a cultural angle to this, where China is more restrained in personal comments, or what? Can you just enlighten me on that?
Well, I think President Xi should be happy, right? Yeah, to be described as a great leader, especially having such kind of compliment coming from the President of the United States. But I think a Chinese leader normally would not say something personal. Yeah, this kind of head of state meetings. Because for us, these are just the great matters of huge consequences, and for us to comment on one's personality or character, or even to reciprocate that sounds like almost a bit flattery. Well, this certainly is not in Chinese culture, right? Yeah. Even in our families, I'm sure Helen would know that, right? We normally, the parents would avoid, such kind of direct, expression of appreciation for the children. Yeah. So this kind of things are changing, but still, it's very much in Oriental culture, I would say.
And Mark, to you, my question is, the day after the summit, when we got such sunny images, Wall Street took a dive. What happened?
Yeah, if I only knew what happened, huh? But I think that perhaps most revealing is not just the stock market as a whole, which the U.S. stock market is near record highs and it's volatile from a day-to-day basis. But to me, the telling thing was that the U.S., I think to Bo's comment about the 3 Bs, beef, beans, and Boeing, that while there seemed to be some suggestion that there would be new orders coming on both the U.S. agricultural products and for Boeing. I think that some of the numbers that the U.S. administration had suggested were disappointing to the market. And so Boeing stock, leave alone the whole stock market, Boeing stock itself, I think, fell by about 11% in the last 2 days, last two sessions of last week. I think that the market still, like I mentioned, I think that the market's uncertain about exactly what quantities or what kind of goods were actually agreed upon. And I don't think we'll know that. I don't think that we'll have a strong sense of that for some time. And like I say, I think that the weapon sales to Taiwan are going to be a key to how large those purchases are. And I think to this idea that the U.S. is President Trump's style of this like flattery and what I think was a bit over the top, I think is part of it gives the impression that the U.S. went to China with a list of demands or a shopping list. Buy our beans, buy our beef, buy Boeing planes, do this and do that. And I think that at the end of the day, the lack of details make it seem like it was much more about like a kabuki theater play where the officials smile at each other, talk nice to each other, and we still don't really know what they really agreed on.
Mm. What?
So, to maintain and to elaborate a little bit on this atmosphere, how do we sustain this kind of, very nice atmosphere? Mark, where do you think the greatest misperceptions in current American understanding of China lie? Following this visit, do you believe there could be any adjustment in the domestic strategic consensus within the United States towards China?
Very interesting, very good question. I think that nothing's going to change, sadly, at the end of the day. I think that leaving aside how it's marketed, how it's packaged, the U.S. and China are in a very strong rivalry, and it's many different. It's global. It's about the ports and who runs the ports in Panama. It is about. It's about, like, I want to say it affects almost everything else. Canada's strategy. What does Europe do if the U.S. is pulling troops? I don't know if we saw this, but the U.S. is pulling 5,000 troops from Germany. And just at the end of last week, we thought they were going to go to Poland, but apparently not. And so I think that the U.S. side of the equation is in great movement. And like in China, where we've seen many senior people at the PLA being dismissed, we've seen the same thing, perhaps on a slightly smaller scale, happen in the U.S. Defense, even though we're at this war in Iran right now, unusual time to be changing high-ranking personnel in the military. So I think that the U.S. and China are engaged in a very tense conflict, and we could just hope that it doesn't have a lot of collateral damage.
Well, that's a little bit sad, but probably it's good to hear. So, Bo, from your perspective, what kind of misunderstandings does China have about the United States, and how should those perceptions be adjusted?
Well, it depends on really who you are talking. Yeah. So I believe, generally speaking, Chinese people and American people have a lot of appreciation of each other. When I was a student in Cambridge, I actually talked to an American professor who said something that I still remember today. He said Americans really love Chinese. In every Chinese small American town, there is always a Chinese restaurant. So Americans knows how to use chopsticks from very beginning. But Americans don't love Russians that much. Well, I don't know why. He didn't elaborate why, but I remember this conclusion. So even in Michael Pence's Hudson speech, I believe, which is almost like the most detailed explanation of why the United States would all of a sudden take China as a strategic competitor. He went down on and on about how the United States had treated China in the most benevolent manner, so on and so forth. How people, swap ginseng for fur, how American ships come to China, how American missionaries come to China, so on and so forth. So deep in American attitude, they believe they are very much generous toward the Chinese people. And the Chinese people are grateful, for their contribution during the Second World War. So I believe Chinese people also have a misunderstanding about the United States. For example, a lot of people believe the United States just want to encircle China, which is nonsense. Some people have even created a term called the circulation of a C-type, around China. So my argument is, even if the United States want to do that, it is simply impossible, because even the American allies, along the first chain of islands, can hardly cooperate with the United States, because these countries are all hedging between, United States and China. So that is why when Elbridge Colby asked Japan and Australia the question whether they would take American side in a showdown with China, both countries refused to answer this question. They refused to answer this hypothetical question. And of course, for good reasons. If American policy toward China is a kind of a strategic ambiguity, why would the policy of these allies be a kind of strategic clarity, right? So I believe the United States will stay in the Indo-Pacific, even if they're talking about how they might retreat to the Western Hemisphere. No, I don't think so. They do not have major threats there in the Western Hemisphere. And so I believe everybody wants to come to the Indo-Pacific, because this is the most dynamic region in the world. This is the center of gravity. The United States also want to stay here to have the dividend, of peaceful development. They are not there, to contain China. That is total nonsense.
So
Fascinating.
we are about to approach the end of our discussion today. Sarwar, would you like to promote something?
Well, I think this has been a fascinating conversation, and I do wish that we could go on for a longer time. What I would like to do is just tell our viewers that over the next 10 days, we will have reactions to the summit from Latin America, from Europe, and the Middle East, and especially from India, because I think that's an area that we should have thought about and maybe made this an hour and a half long program where, to see how the summit is being read in these middle countries, which are increasingly more important and influential. But what I would like to do now, if that's all right with you as my co-anchor, is to just have brief closing remarks from each one. So I'll let you start them off on that, and then I can take over and thank our audience.
Okay, of course. So let's welcome Mark to kind of, have a brief summary or any of your further thoughts regarding discussion and, Trump's visit to China.
Yes, thank you. I really enjoy this dialogue. I think perhaps this is one of the best things that come from the summit, is as Bo had mentioned, the cultural and people exchange, and through that, I think we gain more respect and understanding for the other. But I'm afraid that in the coming years, the U.S.-China relationship is still going to be fraught with challenges. It's not just economic competition. It's competition to win the hearts and minds of the world. And I think that in the coming days, we're going to see other countries perceive President Xi as emerging from the conference more confident about China's place in the world economy, and as a sense of stability in contrast to the U.S. And so I think that we should be looking at that. But again, I would really want to emphasize how important the upcoming U.S. decision is going to be on the weapon sales to Taiwan.
Well,
And
Mark,
Bo?
Mark, you have mentioned a number of important things. What I want to say is this kind of exchange of visit at the top level is certainly the most important, but also something at a grassroots level is also important. That is people to people exchanges. For example, we really have a ridiculous situation because we have around 270,000 students studying in the United States. And I guess how many American students are studying in China now? It's less than 2,000. It's more or less about 1,700 or something. Yeah, and this is much, much lower than in the past. And you also touched upon a good point when talking about winning hearts and minds of the rest of the world. And this has been my consistent argument that between China and the United States, the owning, competition is to see who would make less mistakes and who wins more hearts and minds of the rest of the world, right? So that might be the so-called healthiest competition between us. This is really my hope. It's just like people buy a ticket to watch a kind of football match. Nobody give a damn about who really wins. So if we compete with one another to provide public goods, to the world, that might be the healthy competition that everybody would love to see.
Wow, Mark and Bo, I like your opening, closing remarks so much. I can't agree more. The relationship, the future of the relationship will depend not only on the consensus reached by the head of states, but also on whether both societies, people, hearts and minds can rebuild a minimum of level of trust, predictability, and strategic restraint. So thank you so much to all of our distinguished guests. And over to you, Sarwar.
Thank you. And I totally reciprocate your feeling about the gut level, the exchange of people. I consider myself reasonably well read, but I didn't know that only 10% of China's population belongs to the Chinese Communist Party. That you want to be an engineer, you want to be an investor, you go your own way, you don't have to join the party. Something so simple as that. I said, how could I not know that? And that you can compound to all the different areas. And that's why what you pointed out, Joe, 2,000 American students and 270,000 Chinese students in America, that has to change. But one thing that I would like, especially the talented co-anchor to think about is both these people have made a point that we have to wait and see. And let's give some thought, you and I, to maybe 4 or 5 months from now having a repeat of this to see what actually happened. It might be a very instructive and educational thing to do. And with that, I want to thank my co-anchor Han Hua and her team for the invaluable help in putting this landmark program together. I hope we can do it again. Thank you to our guests, and thank you for your candid response to questions that Hua and I posed. And I'd like to thank our viewers from around the world. Join us again on Polaris Live as we continue to explore the most consequential relationship of our time, United States and China and its impact on the world. Until then, goodbye.